The narrative that runs through our institutions is like a conversation that's been going on since before we were born. And so each generation that comes into the conversation is brought up to speed with some official narrative. And then with that foundation, as it makes everything is axiomatically like built off that. It kind of establishes what's normal. Consciousness is innocent in that it doesn't have anything to draw from in terms of experience, right? And I've said that before, how, the impressions that people receive in their formative years really form their beliefs, and they could be anything, literally anything. And so whoever is controlling that conversation in the formative years is creating the reality for the population. When you have a certain number of years behind you being witness to the conversation, you can see when reality deviates from what the official narrative was supposed to be in the past. Like, there are things that were supposed to have happened by now that haven't happened, be they good or bad. But there's so much going on. The pace of reporting of things has accelerated so much that it has really diluted sort of the magnitude of events. So things that happened like 30 years ago, if they happened today, if they were things that happened 30 years ago that were a big deal, if they happened today, they wouldn't be a big deal at all, really. It would just be like another blip in the news cycle. Like the Iran-Contra thing. That was a really big deal, that there could have been money getting funneled somewhere. Now, well, maybe now that it's likely reached a massive gargantuan scale, maybe now the corruption is getting some attention, but it was a really big deal when it happened. Like, it was on all the TVs. And of course, the outlets, the media outlets were condensed, the audience was condensed. So you really had everybody in one place, and just the volume of content being created was nothing like it is now. So there probably wasn't anything else on anyway. So it was a really big deal. These things registered really largely. But back to things that like didn't pan out. A lot of the doomsday about resources running out and food running out, that was all supposed to have happened by now, certainly. But as I've said before, like, techniques and technologies have been developed to address those things. But there's a consistent pattern of putting fear into the population, just a perpetual underlying fear of this, that, or the other. The boogeyman on the other side of the world, take your pick. The environmental crisis that's looming, the next disease that's going to hit. I mean, this has really come to the fore of late, but it's always been a thing. Like, if you go back down the memory hole a little bit, it's been telegraphed for a long time, like all these, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. And, it did happen with the thing, right? But a lot of what was within that narrative was incorrect, and a lot of the policies that were brought forth and deployed against the public were predicated on ideas that were wrong, even if they weren't explicitly stated, like, that you were killing grandma if you didn't get the thing because it was a sterilizing thing and it'd stop the spread and we could, thing our way out of it. And that was completely untrue. It was an endemic thing from the start. It was going to be endemic. Everybody was going to get it. There was no way. I mean, maybe if it was that like lethal, maybe flatten the curve. I guess that was a fair notion. But there was no way that you weren't going to get the thing. And the head of the CDC, she said it, and she had to endure a correction, as did the president at the time. Said you weren't going to get the thing if you got the experiment. But that was all false. And some of the things that people lost their jobs over it, and people were assaulted over it in different countries. It was just inexcusable. And the thing about a situation like that is it looks very different depending on what side of it you're on. When that much institutional power aligns against you and you are absolutely not going to budge come hell or high water, it puts a different kind of motivation into you. Like, okay, I'm going to have to get off my ass and do something, like I'm going to have to make a serious change in my life. And a lot of people had to face that, and a lot of people lost relationships over it. And it just, I can't understand why people who really didn't have a stake in it, I guess, still want to argue the point. But anyway, just goes to show how strongly people are identified with what the people on TV say. Like, there are people who, if you really just don't agree with the people on TV, you just can't be their friend. So this thing of time and the conversation that was going on before we were born, religious figures get this kind of treatment, and so do historical figures, like this deification that goes on. But if you were around when that person was alive and could hear from all of their contemporaries, you would get a very different story about them. And that's instructive when it comes to evaluating your conditioning. So, like, there was a spiritual teacher, I'm not going to name names because they still have followers, but they were caught up in all kinds of shenanigans, and yet the followers looked past it, and these were really bad things, things that would get you killed, like get you unalived in the village square. And yet this person, they've passed on, but they still have devout followers. And so the question is, will those ideas about the sort of saintliness, will the deification of that person continue? And maybe it will. So we really don't know anything about the people who came before us other than what's written about them. And you just really have to consider the source. And the problem is that the ideas that we hold to be true are given to us on a first come, first served basis. So you really need to go back and kind of examine that and, weigh it against reality. Really deprogram yourself, essentially. If there is a release from the identification with the conceptual self, all of the conditioning goes with it too, because it's seen as just exogenously sourced. And so it's just not identified with anymore. So that is what stands between the public and various kinds of freedom. It's kind of a coercion that happens when your attention is yielded to those of dubious motives, be they monetary or ideological. It's like you've given consent to be programmed. And then the programming can be anything. And some of that takes a hold depending on your critical thinking skills and the age, the impressionability, the age at which you're exposed to it. But we have all kinds of loyalties that we haven't questioned, and a lot of them are to like parasocial relationships with people on television. Sometimes like back during the events of 2020, like the celebrities kind of like were trying to entertain us, I guess, with little songs and things like that. And it's like they were trying to leverage the parasocial relationships. Like none of these people are really free to say what they want to say. I mean, just because that's the case doesn't mean they don't sometimes say things that they mean. But if you're tied to like a big machine, you can't say what you want to say. You've got to be independent of that. And to the extent that technology consolidates money and corruption translates money into power, and so money gets concentrated, then power gets concentrated. All of these interests are very much tied together. If not directly, they're at least ideologically aligned. And so if you're a part of that machine, you cannot speak out against it. And I think kind of what we have now happening is in the United States is a bit of, there's always been kind of a parallel culture. And now it looks like that is kind of getting some energy around it. But there was something the other night when I talked to Collective Dismal that I didn't expand on. And it was about the defund the police movement. And I think, combined a little bit with the pandemic, because I do think there was a slip in the perception of law and order during the pandemic with the streets being empty. I don't know, I think it just put something into people's heads. It's definitely a threshold. But with the stepping back of the police and the problems that ensued from that, my take on that is it's almost like a facet of the Cloward-Pliven strategy of just like maxing out the government and just crashing it and then just trying to make a revolution out of the ashes. But it would be, in this case, like if the local authorities step back too much, chaos ensues, and then that is the pretext for the federal police force. So I think that was, HRC's big thing. She was, I think, all about that federal police force, because the people to whom money and power has accrued, they want to centralize power. They want to centralize control of things. They don't want local control of things. It's a struggle that's gone on for the whole of civilization, right? The Tower of Babel is a centralization. The king versus the nobles, the executive versus the legislature. These concentrations of power vie to get more share and to concentrate power in general. But the problem is that a small number of perspectives can't serve but a certain number of people. And so then you have this disconnect between the locals and the central authority, almost like a Hunger Games type situation. So I guess that's about it for now. Good night.